In this episode of Low Buck Garage, I'm surprised my brakes work. The brakes are starting to work. I'm surprised to find oil in the oil pan. Well, that's oil. I don't see any water at all. I'm not surprised with how my carburetor works. Now, I've been looking around the yard here, and I realized I have 11 project vehicles underway. That seems like a bit of a problem. So in order to fix that problem, I bought another one. Now there's an even dozen. Problem solved. Let's start in the back because that's where I happen to be standing. First thing we see is it has a big bumper. Whoever did this definitely intended this to be towing something. Going up a little bit, you can see it does have a sticker on it. At best I can tell, it looks like it might be 03 was the last registration date. So that's been less than 20 years it's been off the road. So this is pretty recent. I did not get a tailgate with this truck, which is unfortunate, but I did get a radiator, which is fortunate. Now I was told this radiator is not the one from this truck, but it's supposed to fit, and it leaks more than one place. The bed actually looks nice and straight. It's really, there's little dents here and there, but it's really not too bent up. Doesn't look like this truck was really worked that hard or abused that badly. So that's a plus. There are some tiny bits of rust, but that's not too bad. I can live with that. There is one serious steamroller type tire here. That is a 1250 16.5. So that's pretty cool, but it's the only one. Someone used tie downs to hold stuff in the bed. One's broken. It has a really cool sliding window where half the whole window slides. We're gonna have to try that out. Okay. Now the door panels don't really look ripped. They're all peeling off the masonite, but they looks like the vinyl is all there. Here we have the factory stickers. It's got a power lock differential. That's handy. Four-wheel drive, also handy. Note to the operator about locking hubs. Here on the door we have a plate, so we now know it is a model 1200D 4x4. We got a serial number. We've got a wheelbase. We have a net horsepower, 182.3 at 3,800 RPM. Gross horsepower, 196.7 at 4,000 RPM. And max vehicle weight of 6,100. Kind of handy having your exact horsepower down to one decimal place on the door. That's always information you need to know. Here we have some type of accessory. It has a clutch that is engaged and disengaged. This one's labeled switch, in case you didn't know what that was. And this one is a brake. This brake controller, this one has, there's an H and an L, I'm guessing low and high for power. It's got the brake fluid going directly into the interior to this control. So the harder you hit the brake, the more electricity you got, which is actually a real nice system. You got the vents, oh, they operate. And you can lock them in place apparently. The ignition switch is right below the dash. Here's where it's supposed to go. I think I'll end up putting it back there. What's this push-pull? I guess some other kind of, oh no, auxiliary fuel. Oh hey, interesting. Ignition, lighter, throttle. It must have a high idle on the throttle here. That could be handy. It's got the AM only radio because what else could you need? Fuel, alternator, speedometer, temperature, oil pressure, and an aftermarket tachometer. With the red line set to 3,500. Now seeing how this is a real transmission where you can select your own gears, I'm guessing that red line is actually a shift point. Because we already know from the door this will do 4,000 RPM. Oh, we got a fan shroud. That's handy. Unidentified box on the dash. It's been exposed to a little sun, but I've seen worse. We have the usual mouse dropping pile. Looks like this is a seat cover over this torn seat. This won't be itchy at all on your back. You could brush it. I think it's shedding. Now to get rid of the mouse poop smell, let's try this. Oh yeah. That hasn't been opened in a while. That's a lot more fresh air than just the little center opening. The headliner looks real good. It's sunk down here a little bit, but not torn at all. Looks like someone graduated at some point. Hey, it's Mike. Good old International Harvester symbol. And this must be the filler for the auxiliary fuel tank. You know, initially I thought this was wadded up tinfoil in there, but I'm leaning towards beer can. Leave your guess in the comments. We'll find out soon. This is the most effective tank plug I've ever seen. Besides the actual filler cap. Alright, we have, I don't know what we have. Maybe some type of ducting type stuff. So neither aluminum foil nor a beer can. I was wrong on both counts. We got a late model 90s era Dodge rim with a tire that leaks a little bit. The locking cubs actually have the International Harvester symbol on them. It's labeled all-wheel drive because back then they just assumed that all-wheel drive meant you just put it in a gear, not clutches or electronics. Looks like the hood has an opening and closing issue, so we'll have to be careful of that. Yep, that's steel. There's a nice winch bumper. It's a little bit bent, but that's no biggie. It's got a front mount hitch, which is also nice. An aluminum license plate holder. That's kind of interesting. Nicely countersunk screws, too. Looks like you should have 6. They're serious about holding on their license plate. How do you open the hood? Well, oh, that's easy. Maybe. Come on. There we go. It's a V8. Come on in here. Now I know this engine's an International because it says International on the valve cover. That is an incredibly tall thermostat housing. That's like air filter level. That's a cool horn. We're gonna have to see if that works. There's no radiator here, which I expected because the radiator's in the bed. These are rubber lines with compression fittings on them. I have no idea what these are for. They wouldn't be transmission cooler lines because it's a standard. I have no idea what these do. We're gonna have to trace them. Something was mounted here. Maybe that's what connected to those lines down there. Back when I used to work at Napa years ago, they sold these double belts as a match set to make sure they're exactly the same. These aren't exactly the same. Got some rust in the battery box. You can see tire down there. Yep, more rust back here. There's plenty of metal to still hold the battery, so we're going to completely ignore that. I think there may be an issue with this battery connector. That might not work properly. We got some kind of Holley carburetor in there. I don't know which one. Now I wanted to make sure I knew what I was buying, so I spent at least 18 minutes on the internet looking up information on these trucks. And I didn't actually ask the seller what it was, because I figured it'd be more interesting to figure it out on my own. There's supposed to be a pad next to the fuel pump that actually says what this engine is. Let me get a wire brush. Looks like we got a 345. I did some searching on eBay for parts for this truck, and there really is not a whole lot available. But one thing I did find was a reserve tank gas cap from a 69 International for only 10 bucks. And it fits. Before I even get into the cab, I am demousing it. I just vacuumed up something that sounded important. The shift lever pattern. We have reverse, 1, 2, 3, 4, overdrive. That OD might mean this is the super rare 5-speed overdrive version of the International. I am glad I saved that. I already vacuumed up the mouse poop because I couldn't stand being in here. But we've got your basic truck interior. Now we'll figure out what this is. Oh, carburetor rebuild kit. That's never a good sign. We'll just pretend we didn't see that. Old registration. And this agrees that this last registered a little under 20 years ago. Few lights, no big deal. Fuse box, that's nice and easy to get to. Definitely used to have a CB. That makes sense for doing long distance hauling in the 70s. Still looks like we have pretty much all the vinyl, so that's good. Nice little vent windows. Here's the gas filler for the main tank. Now this stuff I pulled out while I was vacuuming. Got the armrests for both sides and the driver's side door latch on the inside. So we're pretty much all set here. Now there's a little bit of body damage on this passenger side front. There, fixed already. We're gonna have to see what we got here. So let's check the oil first. There's a lot. It's actually well past full. Now overfull oil can sometimes indicate you have water in it or there's fuel leaked into it. So that could be an issue. Which means it's time for my favorite game, what's in my oil pan. Previous winners have been water, water and oil, and whatever this stuff is. Let's see what we got in this one. Place your bets, and, well, that's oil. That's just straight oil. I don't see any water at all. As long as this engine's been sitting, all the water would have settled to the bottom. So we have only oil in the crankcase. I think that's the first time this happened on this game show. But it does smell a bit like gas, so we very well might have a bad fuel pump that's pumping gas into the oil. But it's still slippery enough, I don't think that's too big of a deal. I'm going to try cranking this thing over. Now I noticed something when I was under here pulling the oil plug. Look at this piece. This is the tie rod here. This piece is brackets bolted on. It's got to be around a 1/4 inch thick or so. It's got a brace in the middle that's actually stamped to fit the axle tube. There's gussets in the brackets. This looks like factory protection for that tie rod. And that is some seriously heavy duty stuff. That's a real nice touch. I don't think it would ever fly past the bean counters at a big company like Chevy or Ford. But a little company like International that's interested in heavy duty stuff, this does make sense. I'm pretty sure this is negative ground. We'll find out real quick. But it's the 70s, so it's gotta be. And there's no sparks when I hit the terminal, so that's promising. Gonna move this radiator hose out of the fan blade. For some reason it seems that parts for this truck are not that common. I'm gonna try to save everything I can. Alright, I don't know if those connections are any good, but let's turn the key and see what happens. The great news is this is not seized, it actually turns over. And that means we're going to throw some gas in it and see what happens. I think I'm actually getting most of it in the carburetor. This Holly's got a nice big vent. I can fill it up pretty good. Apparently I didn't spill enough down the throat of the carburetor, so let me fix that. Alright, gonna make sure to get it all over the place this time. A little more juice. I wonder if the throttle pedal works. Hey, it works! I'm noticing most of this is hooked up, except for this wire, which definitely looks like it should plug into something, either here, or here, or here, or here, or maybe over there. I don't know where to put that in, so I'm not going to, because since I heard it sputter, I know the ignition works. So I'm just putting it in as is, and we'll figure this out later. Why isn't it tightening down? Now this nut stopped tightening down before the ignition switch actually stayed stable in the dash, so I'm expecting I'm missing a washer. Now I didn't see one inside the truck, but I did find this one in my parts bin. The outside is about right. I just need to make the inside bigger. That actually wasn't as easy as it seemed, because the drill kept catching and spinning the washer inside the vise. So I added a flat spot in the top and the bottom, and hopefully that'll work better. Oh, you can see this nice flat washer is getting a little bit wavy. And that's a good thing, because wavy washers, when they flatten out, they act as a locking washer. So I could pretend that's intentional. Now the other problem I'm running into is as I squish this in the vise, I'm making it oval because it's so thin now. Oh yeah, it's just oval. Well, I couldn't get it to work in the drill press. We're going to try the lathe and bore out that last little bit. Now my flat spots are a real problem, so I think I've got it so the flats aren't quite on a jaw. Hopefully this works. Mooring bars are meant to cut straight sideways, right? I guess it's doing it. Let's see what we got. We're within 5,000 inch diameter. So, let's see if that fits. Huh, it fits. A little bit of room to spare. Think we're good. Now we'll get to trying to start the truck. A little more fuel, we might be there. Okay. Well, that was both good and bad at the same time. This could be an issue. Apparently, these lines are for some kind of oil cooler, which is not hooked up. But besides the giant bunch of oil that just poured out of the motor, that was a real good sound. I gotta clean up this mess before there's a chance to soak in. The local recycling center is real good at figuring out where to put all this weird stuff I bring them. So, that's nice. Remember when I said I should trace where these lines go to figure out what they do? I have no idea what these do. We're gonna have to trace them. That would have been a smart thing to do before I pumped the engine oil on the ground. Now I know where they go though, because I had to remove them. And I broke the fittings while I removed them. Also, I managed to not get a good camera shot at all the whole process. It's kind of an all-inclusive rolling snowball of mistakes. So now I'm just gonna show you what I did to fix it. One of them went right here, right next to where the oil filter goes, and then the other one goes right into the crankcase. I attached a copper line to connect the two. I was also worried having a line straight like this would feed too much oil and lower my pressure for the main rod bearings and all the important stuff. So I made sure to kink it along the way. So the bad installation is a good thing. It was running and I don't see any oil pouring out underneath it. So, now does it drive? It moved under its own power. I'm calling that a win already. Now we need the radiator. I let the engine cool down all the way. I don't like running them when they don't have coolant in them because it creates uneven temperatures. I'm gonna try and move it real quick backwards and behind the shop. That way I can put the radiator in a lot easier. And I won't be running it more than a few seconds, if it works. Apparently a few seconds was all the fuel I had in the truck. Gotta juice it again. I got it moved, and I think the clutch is shot. The clutch is real soft on engagement, even in low range. I think I found the big leak in the radiator. It's cracked there, up there. So, let's see what we can do about that. See about soldering that. Well, I've been sort of heating it up and dabbing it on, and I think I made a complete mess of this. But I also don't see any more holes. And I figure, as long as there's no holes, water can't get out. I don't know if you can see it, but I found another hole in that tube. So we're gonna take a crack at that one too. You can really see it now that I cleaned it up. There's a few tears where that squished. This is where any sensible person would take this to a radiator shop. We're just gonna try this anyway. I made a complete mess of this area also, but we'll see if it holds water. Now I've got two different size rims, 16 and 16.5, and three different styles of rim on this truck. So in order to figure out what to use, I went looking for used tires. I found a set of all-terrains that still have a lot of tread on them. They're only 3 years old, and I found a matching set of 4 for cheap. So, going with a 16-inch rim. Now before I put the tires on, I want to paint the rims. Now this has the white steel grille, so the obvious choice for rim color would be white rims. But they're kind of boring, and the interior is dark green, and I like this better. So I'm going to see what dark green rims look like on this truck. I paid to have them balanced, because I know I'm going to have to try out that 5th gear on the highway, so this is going to have to go high speed. Well, 60. But I don't think that matters. Let me show you what I found. Now I'm going to take my brake drum and put an arrow in the spot that is currently up. And then I'm going to spin it. That drum is way off balance. So I'm just going to completely ignore that for now because those brakes are probably bad. And when I actually get this truck ready to be on the road, I'll have to take this off anyway. So I'll deal with it then. Well, the bolts in this radiator do line up, so that's good. But the hoses definitely don't line up. We got a 90-degree difference here. Clearly this is not the radiator from this truck or for this truck, but it's close enough, we'll make it work. On this upper hose, I need to make it take a corner, but I don't have any corners the right size. And this has a little zigzag here. I'm going to try slicing it here, flipping it over, and seeing if that'll make my corner for me with the hose I already have. Alright, and then we're going to do this way, and that doesn't reach. But I've got a straight shot. So all I need is a piece of tubing that goes about this far and is straight and fits inside. And I'm in good shape. Got some leftover exhaust from the Mutt truck build. I knew that dual exhaust system was a treasure trove of stuff. The exhaust tubing doesn't make the best splice because it's pretty straight. So before I actually put this under pressure, I'd put a bead on the end. But I don't even have a radiator cap at this point, so I really don't care about pressure because there won't be any. This hood is kinked here from someone trying to close it and the hinge didn't move and it just folded. And it looks like it happened a lot. There's a lot of discoloration, so it kind of looks like someone tried to re-weld it. There is another brace added, and it's still kind of floppy. So I want to do something about that before it gets worse. Now, judging by the fender, it looks like this is supposed to be fairly straight. There's a little bit of a curve to it, but not a whole lot. I've taken out one of the hood hinge bolts. I think I'm going to make a brace that connects to there and goes a lot further up. I'm looking at this some more. I think I want to try to catch both bolt holes in this hood hinge. So I marked the position with a paint pen, and I'm going to run a pretty hefty piece of angle through both those holes and most of the way up the hood. My mind sometimes wanders when I do stuff like this. Let me show you something I was just looking at. Take a look at how much room there is between the back of this engine and that indentation in the firewall. There's like an extra foot. I bet this engine compartment could swallow a 6BT real easy, with lots of room to spare. I'm gonna pop off these clamps and see what happens. For the real test, can we just pull down on the hood? Well, it's sturdy, just doesn't seem to move. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. Gaps are pretty nice. You can feel a little ripple here, but that was damage done previously. Now I'm looking at this side. I think I'm going to make one for the other side too before it bends. Now I'm putting a brace on the other side, which didn't look bent, but as I add the brace, you can see that gap there. This side of the hood had a bow to it already, even though it wasn't kinked, it was going to soon. Now I can use this bolt, pull that tight, and hold this straight again. Okay, now I got both sides braced. That works nice and easy now. I dug through my entire stash of used radiator hoses. I could not find anything that would make up the entire lower hose. I could make about half of it, but not enough to finish the job, so you really need a complete hose. I bought a hose. Now, I looked up a 1970 International. This one showed up, but only for the 304 motor. I said very specifically it does not fit the 345, which is what I have here. I figure it's probably close enough. It's a tight fit in the water pump, but I think I can get it on there. I don't know if the parts store computer is wrong, or it's because I have the wrong radiator, but this hose fits fine, no problems. Now I always had to juice the carburetor, so I don't know what's happening with the fuel system. So I went and bought a clear fuel filter to replace this one to at least see what's happening. Alright, at least now we can see what's going on. That fuel filter is totally fine, so we'll save it for later. Also, it's bone dry, which means we probably have absolutely nothing in the tank. Now normally I would just hook a boat tank right up to the fuel pump, but in this case, it looks like the fuel system's intact. I don't see any actual obvious problems with it. So I'm going to go out on a limb and just put gas in the tank, and maybe that'll work. There's a first time for everything. This just feels weird, adding gas to the actual gas tank. I don't know. This battery terminal came completely off, so I need to re-crimp it. And I got a crimping tool you hit with a hammer, but in the engine compartment there's not a whole lot of things to back it up. So what I'm going to do is just slide that back on there. Use a pair of vice grips, but now I want to squish it right at that point. So I'm going to take just a nut. Now the vice grips will provide the force, and the nut will transfer it to one spot, so that way it should crimp rather than just squish. And now we're on there good and tight. Now I'm going to try to crank it over and get it fired up. If you can keep an eye on the fuel filter and the radiator and see what goes wrong with those, I'd sure appreciate it. Just pour it all in. We got nothing in the filter, so that could be an issue. Now one thing we did learn is my repair there leaks, but not that fast, so I'm okay with that. This one actually seems to be kind of holding too. So we are keeping coolant mostly in the motor with only a slow leak. At least there's some circulating in the engine. I'm not going to get hot spots. I can just top it off as needed. To diagnose this fuel system, I need to start eliminating variables. So here's the fuel pump, here's the supply line. We're just going to remove this. Should have done this before I put the radiator in. Oh well, hindsight. Oh, it's ripping. That'll be faster. Okay, no fuel coming out. So we've just learned something. This huge bumper is really handy. Every vehicle should come with a front-mounted gas tank. This is really convenient. We'll try this again here. Okay, keep an eye on that fuel filter. Still nothing. So, looks like we have a fuel pump issue. I know I have coolant in the engine because it's leaking out the water pump. So, yeah, looks like I'm going to be doing something with that too. We've now evolved to the simplest fuel system possible, gravity feed. We've got a tank here. Now the theory is, as long as gravity works properly, this is above that, so the fuel should go to there. If gravity doesn't work properly, then we might have an issue. More than one. Alright, I'm going to pour it in, we'll watch that filter. just filled up. We're gonna have another one of those learn from my mistake moments. They're fairly common here. Fuel definitely was going into the carburetor, but nothing stopped it. It went everywhere. It's dripping. I hear gurgling. At least half this tank of fuel went into that engine while I was going and putting tools away. So now there's a very strong possibility I filled the cylinders with fuel, or at least one of them, and I could hydrolock the motor if I crank this over. A lot of fuel went into the engine, and I don't know where it went. Now I know a bunch of it poured on the outside, but some might have gone inside. Now normally when you get water in an engine, the procedure is you pull out the plugs, crank it over, blow it all of the cylinders, and then put it back together. But with gasoline, you pull out the plugs, you might get a spray of gasoline vapor all over the place, and the spark plugs are out and they're still sparking. So I'm going to try to avoid that massive fire, and I'm going to crank the engine over by hand and just physically turn it. If it stops, then I'll pull out the plugs. If it turns all the way over by hand, I know the cylinders aren't full of fuel and I can go ahead and crank it. This engine has a mechanical fan, which is great because you can grab the blades and just turn it. But you can see when you just turn the blades, usually the belt just slips. So what you do is you push on the slack side of the belt to tension it and then turn it by hand. You see the crank pulley down there is turning. Luckily, it looks like it's an externally balanced harmonic balancer, so I'm going to keep turning until I see that balance weight come back up, and I'll know I'm all the way over. And then I remember the carb rebuild kit sitting on the dashboard. Now let's see what we got here. We've got old crusty cardboard. That's nice. Old crusty gaskets. It's time for this carburetor to come off. We're going to do some exploratory surgery here. This bolt wasn't even tight. Interesting. Alrighty. Now I have the international carburetor off, but this carb's kind of dirty and old, so I figure I'll just go and get one of Holley's brand new top-of-the-line performance carburetors and install that. Oh, yeah, I don't have one of those. What I do have is the old rebuild kit that's missing pieces I found on the dashboard. Oh, that one's broken. I was thinking it might have been a brass float that was sunk, but that's actually not brass. I have a very simple three-step process to working on carburetors that works on pretty much anything. And what it is first look at anything that has a hole in it. Make sure it's not clogged. Like this main jet's half clogged, so we're going to clear that out. And then anything that's not supposed to have something go through it, make sure it doesn't leak. And finally, if anything's supposed to move, make sure it moves. And that takes care of pretty much any carb issue if you're working on the one that came off it. I probably should add, if it's supposed to float, make sure it floats. This is a Holley carburetor I bought used, then realized it's missing pieces, so I never installed it on anything. Is there anything I can snag out of this to make this other one work? But this one has the same issue with the bowl gasket not wanting to release. But it looks like it's in better shape than my previous one, so I have hope. This one has a brass float, so I definitely won't be able to use that. Unless I take this whole thing and shove it on here. Does it fit? Huh. It fits right on. So, my fuel's in the wrong spot and all that, but this is definitely a backup plan if I can't get this other one working. But this is definitely handy to know. You could take a 750 double pumper bowl and shove it on a 2-barrel. Might even work. I was worried this float was sunk, but it feels okay. There's a bunch of crud on the bottom. Maybe it was stuck to it. You can see the bottom of the float there, and that mark on the bottom of the carburetor. There's actually a line of buildup where that float was stuck on there. When I was following my standard procedure and basically blasting through every hole I saw to see that it came out somewhere, I found that this hole here that lines up with this one for the accelerator pump, that one was completely clogged and nothing came out the top. I did about 3 shots of blasting this way, then that way, then this way, then that way. Eventually it started blasting through. So hopefully that clog will solve the accelerator pump problem and it's not actually a bad accelerator pump. Since my rebuild kit had instructions, I actually went to refer to them, but they weren't that helpful. I couldn't even open them. So we're just gonna wing it. Now I just set the float level so it ended up being level at the top of its travel. because float level, level float, that's got to be right. One nifty thing about the gravity feed fuel system is you don't need to attach the carburetor to the vehicle to try it out. We'll just hold the fuel tank up. We've got fuel flow. You can hear it coming in there. And now we'll know if the carburetor overflows before we get it anywhere near the engine. All right, we got leaks. I did reuse old gaskets there, so that makes total sense. But that also means we know we have fuel in the bowl. And I don't see piles leaking out, I only see the leak there. So I'll fix that, and then we'll try again. We can also test out our accelerator pump. There it goes. Yep, we got accelerator pumping. That'll be helpful. Now I torqued this screw from tight, where I had it before, to almost loose again. So now let's see if it seals. Turning the fuel on, and it does not. Looks like I got to replace that gasket. Let's see if the other carburetor has one that'll work. The other one did have gaskets, but they're stuck to the nut. So we're going to see how much of this stuff is interchangeable. If I can put the entire nut with gaskets on here, seems to fit. And then the screw, and see if this will seal. This is all pieces from the other carburetor, so look, I'm really glad this stuff interchanges so nicely. There we go. Turn on the fuel again, and that looks totally dry. We might have a working system here. I got the fuel system hooked up again. I don't see any leaks. I soaked the choke cable in penetrating oil a few times. Check it out. It works now. So we're going to try giving it a start, see what happens. Now I found these control cables all cut off here, and they're right near where this mount was. So I stuck the camera under the dashboard, and those cables go to this panel right here. So this thing labeled switch isn't a switch here, it's a cable that goes to a switch somewhere over there. And then having a clutch and having a brake, I think this might have been the winch control. If anyone knows what type of winch this would go to, let me know, because I'd love to find one. Now these cables mechanically controlled a box here, then that had to operate the winch somehow. And it seems unlikely it would have been electric if they have cables operating it instead of wires. Which makes me wonder if this had a hydraulic winch on it. Now this has a manual steering box, no power steering. Normally you'd run a hydraulic pump for a hydraulic winch. This doesn't have any of that stuff. But it did have those two lines with engine oil. Now I've never heard of this, and it may be entirely unlikely. But do you think it was possible they were running the engine oil into a control box to run a hydraulically powered winch off the oil pressure? Because there certainly aren't any wires or mechanical drive going to this area, and that definitely was a winch. And explain the lines coming off the engine going right to the area where this box was, that the controls go to. Kind of a crazy idea, but it's possible. Now I'm noticing that looks like the clutch actuating rod, and that looks like an adjuster. And it doesn't feel like there's any free play in the clutch at all. It feels like it's pushing almost immediately. Maybe it's actually out of adjustment and stopping before the clutch is actually engaged all the way. I'm going to see if there's any fluid in here. Go figure. Bone dry. I'll just pour some in, we'll see what happens. I think it's doing something. Definitely using up fluid in this reservoir. Oh yeah, I sprayed my camera with brake fluid. I don't know how these cameras survive with me. Well, now that I've sprayed brake fluid all over everything, let's work on that clutch linkage. I backed off the jam nuts. That one could go that far. This one is almost at the end of its thread. I think someone put that collar on wrong, like compress this one all the way, then thread it into this one, and you're not actually able to adjust this properly. So let's take it apart, fix it, see if we can get it to work right. I got the E-clip off the linkage. We should be able to pop this free. There's a lot of pressure on here. There we go. That moved quite a bit when I released it. Let's see which way that linkage is supposed to move. I'm going to go press the clutch pedal. You guys watch this. Now I'm going to take this off of here and get this adjuster working right. Because since this pulls up to release the clutch, and this snapped down when I took off the linkage, that means this was pulled up like the pedal was trying to release the clutch all the time. Which means we might not have a bad clutch. We may just have a incorrectly assembled linkage. Now I got the end off here. You can see how it's jammed up. This is like a tie rod. It's right hand thread on one side, left hand thread on the other. As you turn this, both threads will either expand or contract. And by having it all on one side, you couldn't actually adjust this thing. There we go. Now you can see I'm tightening it to loosen it because this is the backwards thread. And I'm wondering if someone assembled this and was confused by that, and that's where the problem came in. Now we're going to take this to almost all the way out, and then I'm just going to assemble them together to get it to fit. 1, 2. Now we'll go in 2 threads on the other side and then adjust it. There's a thread, and there's 2. There we go. Now we have play in there, so we know for sure that clutch is released all the way. So let's put the clip on, and now we can adjust it normally. Looks like the free play is a little on the excessive side, so I'm going to adjust some of that out. That's not bad. We'll give that a shot and see how it works. By adjusting the free play, it's better. I think I actually might be able to road test this as is and then eventually get to the clutch. That clutch linkage was obviously a problem for whoever last drove this truck, and that might be why this was parked. That would make sense, because the motor runs pretty darn good. I wouldn't have parked it for that. Now since I've added fluid, the brakes seem to be doing something. I can press the pedal, it goes all the way to the floor of course, but then the second time and third time it seems to be up a little bit. And when I press the pedal, that thing's moving. So the brakes are creating pressure here and operating that box. Which means the brakes are starting to work. Also, I've got more free play in that clutch now. As I've been using this, it kind of feels like the clutch was glazed, and that glaze is coming off and it's kind of grabbing a little bit. Well, that's it for today. I'm really glad to see this truck driving again, even though there's a few problems, like brakes, fuel supply, cooling, the clutch. Pretty much anything involving going, stopping, or staying running is a problem. But it does run, and I can move it around the yard. I already have some of the parts on the way. I found a fuel pump for under 20 bucks, so I ordered that right away. That's cheaper than a rebuild kit. I got a lot of bits and pieces I got to bring in order to get this thing back together. So you won't see this immediately, but you will see this truck again. And next time I do a video on it, I'm going to try to have this thing on the road. But I think getting this truck going is a big win. So I'm happy. Hope you're having fun too, and we'll see you next time. Let's see if that horn works. Nope. How about signal lights? Nope. Oh, critical stuff. That doesn't either. I'm wondering about that wire that wasn't hooked up to the ignition switch. I wonder if that powered all the dash accessory stuff. I think not plugging it in might be the cause of all this. So I'll get to that at some point, but not now.